program started, I'm pleased to introduce founding Women's Impact Fund board member, former grants chair, and former board chair, Toni Freeman, who will be leading the discussion. Toni is the Executive Vice President of the Arts and Science Council, leading the ASC's community engagement initiatives. Toni's an active community leader with over 20 years of executive management and board experience, including leadership roles with the Mint Museum, the Duke Endowment, MEC-Ed, the Junior League, and we could be here all night, many more. Toni was board chair my first year on the Women's Impact Fund board, and I consider her a powerful role model as well as a friend. So thank you, Toni, for agreeing to be our secretary. Thank you.
Well, it's always nice to sit together with family. And Arrington, I actually think I was board chair when that grant was awarded to the ballet. So what a pleasant surprise to be reminded of the impact that we can make collectively. And tonight we're going to talk about social impact and collective action. Both are topics that can almost not make your head hurt, your hair hurt, because they're so deep and entrenched, but so important in terms of making a change in our community. So we're going to hear from experts in our 5 areas, and they're seated accordingly. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. First of all, we've got a clock here to remind us so that we're really committed to making sure that we end on time. And part of our program will include opportunity for you to ask questions, but we're going to ask you to wait until the end to do that. So that way we can make sure that we have time to hear from the panel, and then we'll open up to Q&A. We have a commitment with a hard stop at 8:10, no later, for us to end, and so I want to make sure that we do that and hold that true. But let me just reintroduce. I know that you received copies of the bios of our esteemed panelists, but just let me reintroduce them to some of you who may not know them as well, and I'll be very brief. First, for arts and culture, and they're seated this way or alphabetical order of the subject area. So for arts and culture is Katherine Mooring, who's down at the far end on my left. She's the Senior Vice President for our community investment work. She's my partner at the ASC. She's been doing this work for quite a long time and deeply enriched and entrenched in the work of trying to make a change in the community and making sure our investments are done well. Let me also say that our panelists are highly credentialed. They have degrees from across this country, master's degrees, have done deep work and have been doing this work for a long time, and they're deeply committed and dedicated to their chosen profession. Next to Katherine is Ann Clark, who's going to talk about education. She's the former superintendent of CMS, our public school system. She's retired now, but not retired. She's doing work consulting. This is really cool. She's consulting with women who are interested in becoming superintendents of their districts. I tell you, this is a really dynamic group. Next to Ann is Meg Fencil, and Meg works in the environment, specifically as a program director for Sustain Charlotte. She's been doing this work for about 5 years, has a real rich history of doing some research and working on her master's degree. Just reminded me that Sustain Charlotte's going to celebrate its 10th anniversary very soon. We're very fortunate to have her leadership. Next to her is Carolyn Allison. Carolyn is the Chief Executive Officer of the Community Health Clinic. Prior to that, she led the C.W. Williams Health Clinic here in Charlotte for about 10 years. So she has had, a long history of working in community health and making sure that no one's left behind. And then right here next to me is Raquel Lynch, who's the Chief Program Officer at Goodwill. Raquel, you probably know because she's been working in the community for a long time, was previously at Crisis Ministries for 8 years. And so, and you've been at Goodwill for quite some time. So again, these are individuals who are really committed to making a change and difference in our communities. So thank you so much for spending time with us this afternoon. They've received a couple of questions, and then I might ask a couple that they don't know about. But let's start off warm. And just briefly give us 2 or 3 minutes about what you think are really 1 or 2 critical needs in your respective areas. And Raquel, why don't you start first?
Sure. Thank you, everyone, for being here and being interested in this subject. So when it comes to human services, the core of it is humans, right? And we forget. We sort of put it apart and say it's poverty, it's women's issues, domestic violence. And for me, a critical issue is understanding how the brain develops, how we react to things, and how do we take that into account as we create interventions for our clients. And that's something that it's, radically important when we think about education, we think about other things, but we're not thinking about it in a human service arena. And we're talking about humans. Mm-hmm. So I think that's an important part of the work that I'm doing. It's reminding us that we have humans in place as we try to create interventions that help people move forward. I think the other is really, it's an intersection between what we know about race and how race impacts outcomes in our work. And I think it's important to acknowledge that if we don't do that, we're not going to move the needle in the work that we're doing. But I think we talk about it, we advocate for it, but we're not internally working with our employees to understand that, independent of their race, how race impacts their work.
Okay. Well, that's a nice segue.
Excellent, yeah. Once again, I just want to say thank you for having me here. There are 2 critical issues in my mind, is mental health, and I like to also couple that with substance use disorder. Many people know it as substance abuse, and what I'm referring to is the opioid epidemic. The opioid epidemic also is used by individuals to self-medicate themselves if they do have mental health disorders. Since 1999, this epidemic has quadrupled in the United States. And Charlotte is, right up there in regard to the statistics. So it's a critical area. A lot of funding is coming into this community in order to address it, both mental health disorders and also substance use disorders. The other area that is critical in my mind, and I take it from the Department of Health here in Mecklenburg County when they did their community health assessment, is access to care. I run a community health center, and community health centers were set up over 50 years ago in order to open up access to care for individuals, irregardless of their ability to pay. But unlike a free clinic, we do charge a nominal fee. And so not to talk too much about the practice that I run, but access to care is critically important. And this community has demonstrated that through the development of One Charlotte Health Alliance. And I'm real excited about being back in this community because after working at C.W. Williams and leaving back in 2010, to come back to this community, and the 2 hospital systems are coming together, have come together, along with the Department of Health, in order to address these high-need areas to open up access to care.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
How about our environment? What do you think are some of the critical?
We're facing a lot of challenges with our environment, and many of them are related to our massive population growth here in Mecklenburg County. So it's great from an economic perspective that we're growing so quickly. There's a lot of benefits of growth, but it also comes with a lot of challenges. Mecklenburg County had most of its population growth after cars were invented, so we're a very sprawling county. And we've lost a lot of forest and farmland just in the last 30 to 40 years. So this sprawl really creates a lot of challenges from an environmental perspective. We've lost a great deal of our tree canopy. In the city of Charlotte, we lost 49% of our trees between 1985 and 2008. Wow. And we also have a lot of challenges with water quality. The more paved surface that we have, roads and parking lots and driveways, the more degraded our streams get because pollutants get into them. And there's that physical erosion from all the water that's not seeping into the soil naturally. We also face a lot of challenges with our air quality because of our transportation and sprawl. In Mecklenburg County, we don't have a lot of heavy industry, so our main source of the pollutants that contribute to ground level ozone, which is a lung pollutant, is the tailpipe emissions from our cars. So at Sustain Charlotte, we really try to take a perspective of addressing environmental, social, and economic issues by focusing on transportation and the built environment, because we see those as foundational to the way that our environment functions. Another challenge that we're facing in Mecklenburg County is increased greenhouse gas emissions. As more people move here, they're bringing their cars with them, they're buying homes, and even as homes and vehicles are getting more energy efficient, we are recognizing that there's a global crisis of too much carbon going into our atmosphere, and that's already having impacts around the globe. So at a local level, there's problems for our air quality based on the emissions that are coming out of our cars. But on a global level, we also have to think about Mecklenburg County's contribution to the global environment.
Okay. And how about in education?
Well, the people that are going to solve the challenges that have been put in front of you are 155,000 children or more in this community who are currently between pre-K and the 12th grade. And vitally important to them having the skills they need to solve these challenges will be the ability to read. And while one can argue that we have had a huge focus in this community, particularly over the last 5 or 6 years with Read Charlotte, around literacy and on grade level readers by the time students in 4th grade, we have to continue that press because we're not where we need to be. And I can assure you that we have the brain trust among those 200,000 plus kids in our community to meet and solve these challenges, but literacy is going to be a critical skill. I need to go back to what was said earlier. It may be a surprise and perhaps not that when I polled elementary principals in the district 5 years ago about what their number one budget priority would be, expecting to hear math, manipulatives or more classroom libraries, what the principal said to me, again, elementary principals, is we need support with the mental health issues we're seeing in our classrooms, which was a real bucket of ice cold water splashed in my face and began a significant investment in getting resources for all of our students, but particularly for our elementary age students. And now that I'm not the superintendent, I feel like I can break rules. So I'm going to throw a third challenge in. Given the first two that I've talked about, I think we need to, as a community, as a state, and as a nation, be really thinking about our teacher pipeline and who is going to stand in front of our children, both those that are here today and those that are coming, as you heard about the growth in Mecklenburg County.
Okay. Katherine, arts and culture.
So I like to frame these two issues or focus areas as opportunities. I think two big focus areas for the arts and cultural sector, not just in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, but nationally, are really taking a hard look at issues around cultural equity. Raquel spoke a little bit about race. I think that that's one of the factors, but there is a national movement that is also happening locally around really taking a deep look at who is being served, whose voices are at the table, who's sitting in the seats. These arts and cultural experiences, these are nonprofit organizations in many cases, individual artists. We are of the community, part of the community. We need to represent the community and serve fully the community. And so ASC is taking a really hard look at issues of cultural equity and working on an organizational statement. This is a national conversation that is at the forefront of all of the conferences and convenings that we are attending. And I think it's core to any conversation going forward about how we collectively support arts and culture in our community, that we represent all. And so that's a big focus area. I think the other is kind of interesting given our subject matter today is this focus around arts and social impact. And so I describe that sometimes as the way we talk about the intersections of arts and, right? So all of the ways that arts and culture are contributing to other important community issues, all of the ways that arts and culture can enhance educational outcomes, that, can work in healthcare environments, can work in addressing other big community priorities. And again, this is a big national conversation that is also being replicated locally. And I think, the challenge is we'll talk about that a little bit later, is, how you express that and tell those stories. We heard a really fabulous story this morning about the way that an arts experience has completely shifted someone's trajectory. And so I think that would be my other big focus area to think about, is that social impact of the arts, and not just the arts for art's sake, which we know they're critical and wonderful and do so much to enhance our souls, but all the ways that arts and culture can impact broader community priorities.
Okay, thank you. So I've been working with Octavia Sewell, and she uses a phrase about what's in the ground. And so we're talking about social capital and collective action as kind of our framework, our lens tonight. But let's do a little dive into what's really kind of in the ground. So you've heard them talk about what are critical issues. I'm going to change our questions up a little bit and talk about what are you seeing in your respective area that's being bold, that's an initiative that's really kind of moving the needle. Help us understand, how are things changing that are making a difference? And you don't have to go in order for this one. Whoever feels like they want to speak first.
I'll go with a national example that sort of speaks to what I've just shared, that I think is incredibly bold, and many of you may have read about this in the last few weeks, the Museum of Modern Art announcing that they're going to close their galleries for 4 months to take a deep look at who is being shown in that space, and to reach into their archives to make sure that they are sharing broad and diverse art forms and artists from different backgrounds, ethnicities, you name it, ages. They're going to close during the peak of their visitorship in the summer months. You can think about that in New York City. And so, to me, that is an example at a national level of a very bold step that an institution is taking in the arts field to begin addressing issues of equity and impact.
Okay. That's great. Who's next?
I have one. I'm lucky enough to work for an organization that has a national platform, Goodwill, and we're known for training. We're known for our stores. I know that. Thank you for all of you who shop there. But we also are known for our training. And we were lucky last year to be the recipient of $1.5 million. But this company called Cognizant, who actually said, we are having an issue with H-1B visas. We're not getting the workers, actually, that we need to work in technology. And they said, we're going to invest in working on inner city and training people who could move quickly into jobs in technology so they could actually have a better pathway. And I think that was a bold statement, because it's saying, we know the role that we play in bringing people externally to take those jobs. And we're actually going to train and invest in communities. And they opened their foundation here in Charlotte. Right? It's a national foundation, but their first gift was here in Charlotte. And I think that was a bold move. To say that. And I have to say this past year has been also a pathway to help people understand that people of color are smart. I have to say that out loud. That they could have those jobs. That is not the educational outcomes that are actually going to determine the future. So we're going to continue to invest. And they continue to show us the outcomes. So they're getting jobs in Salesforce certification, and they're being actually promoted because of that. Their web development is actually a pathway for people who maybe did not have great outcomes in high school, but they're actually smart, right? And I have to say that and remind people, right? We're not done because academically we did not succeed. They're still very smart and strategic, and they actually could make a living. And that's something that I think, bold statement, but this man from India, young, with a vision, is actually investing in this community.
I'll go next. Okay. One bold move that occurred here in Mecklenburg County were the two hospital systems coming together. I keep going back to One Charlotte Health Alliance. That's significant because I come from the Northeast, New York, New Jersey area, and it was very unusual to be in an environment where there's just two healthcare systems. And with such a great need within the community and working in silos apart from one another. And the beauty is coming together around the issue of, once again, access to care, and truly beginning to say, we're going to put together a universal plan in order to address it, and also to be able to reach out to the community and hear their voices, include their voices in the things that we're doing. Another bold move here, also from the healthcare standpoint, is in the area of Medicaid. Dr. Cohen, she is the director for North Carolina, the Department of Health and Human Services, relatively new here in North Carolina, and she's been extremely bold as it relates to Medicaid. Medicaid, for most of you, Medicaid has been what we call fee-for-service. They would identify a doctor's practice, go, and whatever services that are provided, then Medicaid would reimburse the provider. Well, she shifted things. North Carolina did not accept Medicaid expansion like many other states in order to open up more access to care to that population. But what they did under her authority is that now we're rolling out Medicaid managed care. And why that is so important is that now individuals typically who are not really taken into care and really being a partner in their care, now as providers, as practitioners, we have to really look at their outcomes in measurable ways in ensuring that the community is going to become healthier. And I think that that's a bold step for this community, for this state. So I'm very happy.
Thank you.
I can go. So the health of our environment is dramatically impacted by the form of our built environment, where we put buildings, how we get between buildings, where people have access to jobs and education and shopping. And about 30% of people in Charlotte don't own a car. So that creates a lot of equity and access problems. And for people that do own a car, they're often very reliant on driving to get around instead of being able to walk or bike or ride public transit. And the city of Charlotte right now is in the middle of a process of updating our zoning ordinance. And I know it's pretty wonky, but they're doing a lot to really make it very user-friendly. They're about to start 3 workshops to develop the Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan. So this is a plan where the planning department staff are going out to neighborhoods throughout Charlotte and asking residents what type of built environment do they want to see 21 years from now. And with that information, the planning department will be able to put in place the rules to ensure that we get the type of development that we want. That's really critical from an environmental perspective because it will determine how clean our air and how clean our water is and where the tree canopy is able to return and how we're able to protect habitat for wildlife.
So I've had sort of the unique opportunity. I was telling someone earlier this evening, I spent 35 years of my 35-year career in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. So I only knew one district. And over the last year and a half, I've had the opportunity to be in 19 states and probably about 30 different school districts, all in a quest to obviously support those districts and particularly women interested in leadership. But more importantly, throughout my 35 years in Charlotte and engagement with a variety of different nonprofits, I was always asking the question, who's in the air traffic control for children and family in our communities in terms of the coordination of services? And while I don't have that answer from afar, I come back to this community now thinking about ways that we can create that air traffic control for whatever the opportunity, I like to use that word as well, is in front of us as a community, whether it's serving our homeless children and not just serving our homeless children, but thinking about the training and support and the access to health care and so many of the things that, and getting all the agencies around the table that service our homeless children and families and thinking about how collectively we can own a family's journey through services to affordable housing, permanent housing. And so you can begin to see the opportunity that we have to bring all the amazing nonprofits in this community together by function and common service focus and begin to create an opportunity for the over 5,000 homeless children in this community to have a different trajectory other than the one they find themselves in now. But that's not just about serving the homeless children. It's about their guardian or significant adult in their life, and all the things that you're hearing so many of the folks on this panel talk about. So while I don't have an exemplar to lift up to the group, there have been efforts in this community to coordinate all of the agencies providing reading tutoring in our community and all the agencies that are providing mentors for our youth. So I see some opportunities to build on that in terms of really having a collective, comprehensive, what I call 360-degree approach to working with our children and families.
Okay, thank you. That's really good in-the-ground information for us to have. So now let's go to our framework in terms of looking about social capital and collective action. We're really curious if you're seeing nonprofits, organizations, nonprofit or a partnership with a for-profit, where there is a positive step towards building social capital or collectively working together to have positive outcomes for our community. And you don't all have to answer, but we'd love to hear if you know of an example that would really inform us.
I know of one. Goodwill Opportunity Campus. We have a medical practice within the Goodwill Opportunity Campus, and also just recently opened a 3-operatory dental practice. What I love about the Goodwill Opportunity Campus is that they actually brought together independent organizations, and collectively we're seen as partners and not just as tenants, and which I really appreciate. And it even goes further to my staff and the people we serve. And on a regular basis, we come together in order to determine outcomes for individuals who go there seeking assistance, whether it be jobs or financial advice or to open up an account within a credit union or to come to our practice. We come together in order to talk about how can we better improve, their outcomes.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol. That's a great example. Anyone else?
I would certainly lift up Renaissance West, a community initiative that involves a K-8 Charlotte-Mecklenburg school, a community-funded child development center, a medical clinic that is under design at this point, an amazing community center, and a mixed-use housing that includes seniors as well as family housing. It's only 3 years in terms of the school's is in its second year. So certainly lots to continue to do and support as a community to make that a success. But I do think it is a promising area for our community to keep an eye on. The West Boulevard corridor, which has a public library and a Y and a number of child development centers, really creates a wonderful opportunity for us to show that kind of collective impact. It's also very close to the Central Piedmont campus, the Harris campus, so huge opportunities for adults and children. And if you're not familiar with it, I would encourage you to learn more about Renaissance West.
Great. Anyone else?
I want to give kind of a small example in the arts and cultural space of a really interesting collaboration that I just was talking with someone about a week or so ago. Just thinking about social capital fundamentally, right? The sort of exchange of humans, to use Raquel's term. I had this really interesting conversation with someone with the Charlotte Folk Society a couple of weeks ago who started talking about this new collaboration that they have started with A Sign of the Times of the Carolinas. And I don't know if you're familiar with either of those organizations. Obviously, the Charlotte Folk Society is looking at sort of perpetuating the folk traditions in largely sort of the southeastern U.S., and A Sign of the Times focuses on the African-American historical experience, largely in the South. And they've come together almost kind of organically, thinking we're all here talking about music in the South, but we're talking about it through different lenses, largely racial ethnic lenses. And what if we find a way to sort of bridge those worlds? Actually, A Sign of the Times has a program called Bridging Musical Worlds, and I think it just sort of organically occurred to these two organizations. We're both doing kind of a similar thing with slightly, with quite different audiences. What would happen if we brought the two together? And so they've started some collaborations to bring their audiences together, to build that social capital, to hear from one another and tell stories and listen to music and enjoy that experience. And so it's kind of a smaller example in some ways, but I think those sort of organic grassroots opportunities are really important because it sort of sets the stage for the much larger collaboration down the road.
Okay, great.
I wanted to share the example of an event that I think really exemplifies the building of social capital in Charlotte, which is Open Street 704. Has anyone been to this? Mm-hmm. Yes. Great. So this is an event that happens twice a year and several miles of streets in different Charlotte neighborhoods. So it's rotating by event. The streets are shut down to vehicles, and it's a time for people from all walks of life to just get out there and enjoy the streets, walking and biking and rollerblading and dancing. And there's so many organizations that get involved in connecting with people, and neighbors are out there meeting each other in a very informal atmosphere. And I think it's really powerful because it allows people to meet in a public space that is normally reserved for cars. And it also moves throughout neighborhoods in Charlotte, so it lets people see and connect with residents in a neighborhood that they may not have been familiar with.
Very cool.
Yep.
Raquel, you want to?
So I was going to say a small example, but actually big impact. Renaissance West called us in Self-Alliance, which is the domestic violence shelter, and the Y that is on the same side, where we're talking about the fact that there was not a bus line that connected us, right? That people in Renaissance West felt that they needed to walk almost half a mile to make it to the campus. And I remember having these conversations about how do we solve this issue. So we called CATS, and we had a meeting with them, two meetings with them. And this last October, they expanded their line so it could connect us all. Because we kept asking ourselves what will be important. And what was important was actually none of us was actually the Walmart. The Walmart would actually create the ridership, right, that is needed. Now that there's a Walmart near us. So we make sure that it was stopped at the Walmart. Actually, we could create the ridership that they need in order to sustain the bus. So it was something that helps the environment, but also helps the connection. People who may have felt isolated in that environment to connect to other services.
I told you they're smart. Really smart group. Okay, so one of the questions I know that we want to leave answered is how do we engage to be supportive of social capital? How can we invest to be supportive of social capital, building social capital?
I think there's the opportunity to think perhaps differently about funding and funding collaboration and efforts where there is a very intentional effort to have a collective impact, such as many of the efforts that have just been described by the other panelists. But I think if we want people to collaborate and work across differences or realize that we have lots of nonprofits in this community, and it's not about competing for funds. It's really about being solution-oriented. And if you could fund a collective solution to a particular challenge or opportunity that's in front of the community, I think that would be really exciting to see our funding community make that shift.
Okay. What other advice?
I think a lot, and we've explored this a lot in the cultural community, I think, recently. This idea of, as we think about program delivery and design, that it's with and not for, that we are looking a little differently at how we engage with communities. So I think often we all, are working in these nonprofit environments, and we're passionate people who see needs and populations that we want to serve and things that we want to do and good that we want to leave behind. And I think sometimes we can get so carried away and the busyness of designing things that we think will help people and bringing people together from our perspectives that we forget sometimes to actually have the conversation initially with those that we're trying to be here to support. And it seems pretty simple, but the frequency with which the other way happens is pretty much all the time. And so this sort of idea of with, not for is really core and to me in how you build social capital, and really thinking about social capital in some ways a little bit differently, that it's not necessarily always someone with or having privilege giving to someone who may not, but that it's an exchange. And so really being willing willing to engage with community, listen, ask questions, and have the community help determine what the solutions are before we all just kind of jump in with what we think is best.
I also think an interesting question to ask we often ask when I've been on both sides of receiving funding and granting funding, we often ask, who do you serve? And I think, Raquel has really lifted up an intriguing idea for me to even think about further, this notion of asking who doesn't have access to your services and really pushing organizations on this notion of access and opportunity to maybe think differently about their service delivery or a different direction that they may want to consider. So I think this notion of we all can say who we serve for the organizations that we lead or serve in employment or as a volunteer, but I think this notion of really asking people about access, who has it, who doesn't, is perhaps an interesting thing to consider.
Okay.
I heard an interesting definition of poverty in addition to economic poverty, and that is being in the position of having nothing of value to offer in return. And I don't think social capital is a sustainable strategy when it's not built on relationship. As Katherine mentioned, listening is the most important. We can't go in with preconceived ideas of what a community needs if we really want to build the relationships that define social capital. And as I think about the communities I've partnered with, there's nobody I've worked with that doesn't have something to teach me.
I think the idea of not dismissing organizations that may have not found the outcomes that we actually intend them to or seek for them to acquire when they have not had the social capital to invest or receive funds in the past, right? So I think it's important to take that into account as you get requests from organizations that are small, starting, or actually underrepresented communities who are actually starting something for themselves, and they're equally dismissed because they're not a known organization. And I think it's important for us that if we have resources, to partner with others. This is what we do because we know we could lift up others. But I think as you think about funding, to consider those who may have not had the opportunity in the past to track the success, but they are actually having success. They just don't know how. They don't have the funds to measure it, to evaluate for the evaluation. They don't have someone who could actually be in charge of volunteer recruitment. So to consider that somebody who's fully just doing the work but do not have the infrastructure, how do you look at that work differently? And that, to me, is actually the power of social capital. Because if you could see how others have, you could also see how much work they're doing with little resources.
Insightful.
I think that one opportunity that came to our organization that I never thought about before was actually being a part of a program I started in San Francisco, and that was to collaborate with an organization that works with individuals coming out of prison and transitioning back into the community. And one statistic I was unaware of is that most individuals coming out of prison, if they have a healthcare issue, they come out with hardly any medicine. They're lucky to have 30 days of medication. And when you think about a medical home, you think about your doctor's office, et cetera. And having that opportunity brought before me and, just developing a unique partnership outside of what I would typically think of as it relates to collaborative partners. It's just something that is very unique, but also helping to support individuals who are reentering into our community. And one aspect of this program was to fund individuals who are recently incarcerated and to teach them how to support others who are coming out of prison and being that partner with them and literally taking them to their doctor's office, taking them to, different activities, services that they may need, which is unbelievable. But Mecklenburg County, we're one of the counties that's doing it out of about 2 other counties, North Carolina. So the uniqueness of the program is important.
Oh, wow. Those are all great examples of leveraging social capital in our respective areas. We're doing really well on time, and so a question that I didn't tell you in advance is I want to give you an opportunity to just have a moment to have your say. So what I really like about the Women's Impact Fund is that we really are committed to being informed philanthropists. And that we know collectively that we can make a difference and impact, which is why we pull our efforts together. So you each, I'm going to give you a minute. What's your closing statement? What do you want to say to us as people who are really deeply committed to this community and making a change around this issue of collective action and social impact, social capital? You've got a minute to have your say.
I will say, someone said it better than I will, so I'm going to reference that. There was a blog post about a couple of weeks ago. There's a blogger out of Seattle. I don't know if anyone else follows him. I'm going to be following him now. I really wasn't prior, but he has his blog is called Nonprofit AF. Get it? Not .com, which is brilliant in and of itself. But he published a piece a couple of weeks ago that really spoke about both philanthropy and volunteerism and how sometimes we go in with the best of intentions. And I think this is a little bit along the lines of what I was saying earlier. And almost interfere, impede with the nonprofit or the organization who's trying to do this important work, because we get so caught up in our own needs and desires as philanthropists or volunteers that we forget about that we're here to serve this mission. And so I would really recommend that you guys read that blog post, because he goes into quite a bit of detail about all the ways in which both philanthropists, individual or corporate or foundation, and individuals as volunteers or donors kind of get in the way of the work with the best of intentions, right? But almost letting our own sort of self-interest guide us when in fact we're there to really serve the mission of the cause. And so that would be my guide, you know, and sort of parting word to think about, and sort of think about how you're using yourself, and in which cases is it best to write a check and step back and let the professionals and the experts do the work? When is it really important that you are rolling your arms up and in there with them doing the work? And just to find that balance.
Thank you, Catherine. Who's next?
I think the world of philanthropy is becoming increasingly interdisciplinary. And there, as we've discussed tonight, there are so many intersections between the 5 subject areas. So I would really encourage you, I know you all do look at your grant proposals from that interdisciplinary lens, but really look for those opportunities to make an impact across your focus areas. And there are so many challenges in our communities where a community may be dealing with challenges in 3 of 5 of the subject areas, or 2 out of the 5. So I would say, really think about the intersection of those.
Anyone else?
I would just say that it is not okay that we live in a community where children are born in poverty and stay in poverty. I just have to let that sit for a minute, and for all of us to be uncomfortable with that. And I agree that the intersection of your 5 focus areas creates an incredible opportunity for children. And oftentimes I do think, as Raquel said, we forget about the human part of this. And if I really sort of peel it all the way back, and I think about the thousands of children that I have served and worked with over a 35-year career, it really boils down to hope. And hope, for us, we can think way out. And for many of the children in this community, a hope is the next hour, or maybe the bus ride home at the end of the day. But that's about as far as many of our children of poverty in this community can go.
Thank you, Anne.
What's been on my mind to talk about is the immigrant community. There are so many barriers for our immigrant community that there's this fear, real fear, in regard to receiving services throughout our community. And as nonprofit organizations, how can we partner in order to begin to bridge that gap? In one example, I had the health director come to me and ask, can we put the WIC program within one of your sites? And this will open up access, for individuals in North Charlotte. And for me, I was like, yes, I would love to do that. And that's very common for community health centers. But once again, how can we think outside the box, but also look at certain communities that we really haven't paid a lot of attention to? And there's a lot going on in the media and in the news, et cetera. And sometimes it gets watered down by this wall. And, we need to step back and look at, the human side and what can we do with the means and with the voice. And I love the fact that you guys are here. I think you've taken the first step by being here, by listening and being engaged. And I'm really proud to be a part of this.
I only have 1 minute. And it's going to be really hard for me to do in 1 minute, I have to say. Because I think there's an important intersection that is occurring right now to all of us. And we're being disrupted by technology and social innovation. But at the same time, we have invested 50 years in many organizations in this community. And I think to me it's important to look at what is that moment in which we could actually help people who actually traditionally have done something span and receive the wisdom of new people who actually have great ideas and can disrupt that work. And that will be very important in this work. What is the opportunity when you all look at the lens of who's asking for funding to look at those who are actually really tying themselves to the idea that my way works, and how do we open the opportunity to so many innovative, brilliant women and men who are creating innovation for our clients, which is more important. So I think that, to me, that's an important intersection that if we don't pay attention, we're going to miss it. It's not about destroying institutions like some of my young friends said, that a nonprofit are actually saying that we should do. It's really how do we create an opportunity for those institutions to actually open the doors to innovation.
Thank you, Raquel. So they've had an opportunity to have their say. Now it's your turn. So they are looking forward to having questions. This is an incredible group, and please take advantage of this opportunity, a word that we've used several times tonight. Oh, come on. Will you stand up first so we can make sure your voice projects? I don't think we have mics.
A few weeks ago, we had a leadership summit from the Women's Impact Fund, and one of our government officials stood up and said, please let me know, give me feedback on what you want. And when I hear you talk about the environment and us advocating for a better environment and more canopy or reading or arts, we have an opportunity, I think, as the Women's Impact Fund to let ourselves know, we're 500 strong, we're growing. What do we want to advocate for? When do those opportunities arise? So it's an idea I was ruminating about, but specific to the environment, how do we know when this survey is coming out? How do we advocate for that?
Well, Sister Charlotte has a great weekly newsletter, and so that's a great day. On various government websites, you can subscribe for updates. So, for example, the planning department, there's just various different departments within the city. Probably the planning department is going to have the most comprehensive ones. But one of the things that we try to do as an organization is find those opportunities for public engagement that are most likely to have an impact on social equity, environmental health, and economic vibrancy, and share those with the public as engagement opportunities. And there are a lot of other great environmental nonprofits in Charlotte, so if you just subscribe to their newsletters, you'll also get updates about their advocacy opportunities as well.
Thank you. There was a question here in the middle. Yeah, I have a question. Will you stand up to help project your voice? Thanks.
There's so much negativity in the news right now. I'm just curious for you guys as leaders in the community, what's something amazing that you think is going on in Charlotte right now?
One of two of you want to share something amazing?
So I'll jump in, but I'm going to have to say it's for the whole state of North Carolina, but that even makes it more amazing. I'm involved right now in an effort to redesign teacher preparation for the 13 colleges of ed in the university system in North Carolina, which is pretty amazing to get the entire university system to commit to really a complete redesign that will address so many of the opportunities that have been talked about here, certainly the environment, certainly health, certainly employment, and the arts. So just exciting to know that that's underway and will be finished by this summer in terms of the recommendations. And I think that's an important step if we're really going to be a state that can attract people into the teaching profession. We need to prepare our teachers differently for many of the opportunities you've heard the panelists talk about today.
Great.
I've got one. Charlotte City Council a few months ago unanimously approved a strategic energy action plan to dramatically reduce the city's contribution to greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 for city operations and then 2050 for citywide. And just last week, the governing body of Charlotte Area Transit System, or CATS, approved the vision for the 2030 transit plan that will include bus improvements, bus rapid transit up to the Lake Norman region, and the Silver Line light rail from Matthews all the way across the river to the town of Belmont. So now we have to figure out how to pay for it, but a lot of good movement on that.
That's the amazing part, right?
And I just want to say quickly, I'm lucky I get to work in the world of amazing, and so if you guys need a little food for the soul, go to an arts event.
Yes.
There are amazing exhibitions. The ballet is doing incredible work. I mean, there are things happening in neighborhoods and rec centers and libraries and parks, big to small, free to, the highest tiered ticket at the Belk Theater. You can find anything in between. And so, I mean, that's one of the things we talk about with the arts and social capital is it's such an amazing way to come together with people from all stripes and share in some kind of live transformative experience. So when you need a feel-good fix, like charlottecultureguide.com is where you should go. And
I saw a couple other hands. Yes. Will you stand up so you can help project your voice? Thanks.
I think transcends all of what you're working on is this idea of affordable housing. How important do you think that is to the equation?
I just want to speak. Affordable housing is extremely important, especially, with the rapid growth, of apartments and condominiums, et cetera. There's a couple organizations that are developing transitional housing, which is a little bit different. It's really to help bring people out of homelessness, but also working with some nonprofits like ourselves and others in order to bring services to them so that they can sustain, that home and bring wraparound services that are so necessary. So I'm seeing more of a movement as it relates to transitional housing leading into permanent housing for individuals.
I would just add, it will probably shock many of you, but as your superintendent, the last 2 years I probably spent 15 to 20% of my time with the city of Charlotte, focused on affordable housing, and not only affordable housing, but the placement of affordable housing. I think the fact that we have 75, or did at the time 2 years ago, 75 schools with 70% or higher poverty in our school system, obviously housing plays a big part in any opportunity that we as a community want to change that.
We also need to be thinking about where we're building houses, not only from the perspective of school equity, but also from the combined costs of housing and transportation. So in Charlotte, the median household spends 29% of their income on housing and 22% on transportation. So together, that's 51% of household income. For affordability, that really shouldn't be over 45%. So it's really important. There's a lot of challenges here, making sure that people have access to the community if they don't drive, but compounded with that, making sure that they have access to schools for their kids.
Great.
And I'll just say, ASC, we just confirmed the last speaker this morning. We're going to be hosting, speaking of the arts and intersections that I talked about earlier, we're going to be hosting a conversation about all the intersections of arts and affordable housing in May. So look out for that coming soon. Just to have this conversation about all the ways that the arts can or do or should or could play a role in important issues like affordable housing.
Particularly placemaking.
Correct.
I think the importance of housing stability in any other outcome is it has to be mentioned in every conversation. A child cannot really study and do excellent in school if they don't know where they're going to sleep, if they don't have lights, right? And it is something, a conversation we used to have a lot at Crisis Assistance. We are not just saving someone's household, but also helping that child learn, right? So it's important for us to actually all participate in the city, in the planning of the city. Our city planner is really interested in this subject, not just for affordable housing, but what are we willing to give up, right? I told my husband that the city planner said maybe we should not have single house designation in Charlotte. He lost his mind. I said, actually, our house is multi-family house anyway, so we already lost that battle. But it's important to actually understand what are we willing to give up in order to actually have affordable housing. If we're going to talk about that, we need to actually understand that we're part of that solution, and we need to give up something.
Great questions. We have time for one more. I want to make sure that we're not leaving any question unanswered. All right. Well, first. Oh, there is one. Okay.
I was going to say, what is one way that we can help reduce the stigma? So there's a lot of times where children are afraid to say anything. Adults are afraid to say anything. How can we, aside from putting our collective monies towards organizations and providing the grants and everything, what can we do to help reduce that stigma and help people know that they are in a safe space to get care that they need?
I'll just ask one of you if you'd respond to that. We're going to think about that. It is a big question.
I know.
And I'll be glad to take a shot at it. I think that it is important for us to actually really be mindful of our own bias towards people who we think are going through something we couldn't experience, right? So I was lucky enough to work for Crisis Assistance during the Great Recession, and the number of people who came through the door who were making so much money that same year, who were experiencing that, and people who were trying to avoid to go through the doors of Crisis Assistance because that couldn't happen to them. And the reality is that in this country, all of us have the opportunity, actually, and potential opportunity of experiencing poverty and isolation and be abused by our loved one, right? And so if we were going to talk about taking away the stigma, it's really actually helping others understand that we know that we also that could happen to us. So we don't look at it as a foreign thing. It is something that, as humans, it could happen to any of us.
Thank you, Raquel. Well, please help me thank this wonderful panel.
I want to add my thanks as well. Our vision is to be a community of philanthropic women impacting the world, and you all have modeled for us what strong women impacting the world look like. So thank you so much.